total of $180 million on the Bay of Pigs invasion, then I don't see what is the excuse of the federal government in not sending troops into Birmingham to protect American citizens. I don't think the public accommodations bill will go through. I think that the civil rights legislation in the House has dragged along too much. I believe that this legislation could have been brought out quicker. In the South, they're honest. In the North, they're hypocrites. The South rejects the mass, but will select individuals. The North says we love all Negroes, and they still select or fail to select individuals. No, it's hypocrisy in the North, very definitely.
I'm Tom Nash of the Post newspaper in Berkeley. Would like to know how do you account for the fact that there's such a small reception for you?
Oh, I don't speak to receptions. I speak to people.
Do you feel that you will be able to get back to Congress soon?
Well, I'm going to have a press conference inside. We can answer questions.
What kind of a democracy is this? When just last night in San Francisco, which prides itself as being a sophisticated town, they arrested 52 students for protesting at the Fairmont Hotel against Dean Rusk's appearance there in favor of the war. They had a right to protest. This is the ferment that has brought America thus far. Every human being has the right to protest. This is what I have been doing, and this is why I'm in the place that I am today. Black power, my friends, means that we are developing now a new breed of cats. You know, when you read the Bible and you hear about old Daniel going in the lion's den, the Bible is so old, and the mythology of the Bible is not exact. When they lowered Daniel down in that lion's den, there might have been Black Panthers down there. And the Black Panthers, you see, saw old Daniel coming down, and they took their paw and yawned and said, "Here comes another one of the new breed of cats." We're new breed of cats. New breed of cats. We are finished with the old things. We have pushed them behind. See, they already took care of Whitney Young. He's the Wall Street of the civil rights movement. And poor old Roy Wilkins, he's on his last legs. And Phil Randolph, who was a great man, he's very ill. And there was no one left except dear old Martin Luther. And Martin came down to confess his sins to Big Daddy. And Martin is no longer totally committed to nonviolence. Oh, and you know, I'm a Baptist, you see. We put the convert on the bench, and they sit there until they see the light. We call it the mourner's bench, you see. So I got Martin Luther on the mourner's bench. And one day we might make a man out of him, you know that? Might take the halo off his head. So whether you like our leaders or not, we got them. We got our Stokely Carmichaels. Yes. We got our Rap Browns. We had our Malcolm X. We got our Floyd McKissick. And you got the old man of the sea. We are living today in not a great society. We're living today in a sick society. This is a sick society. And we young people, I noticed the word we, and I'll be 60 years old this year, baby. Keep the faith and spread it gently, but save a little for me. And
Times have changed, politicking has changed, campaigning, methods of raising money, even our moral standards have changed. Not the basic moral standards, but the limitations of our moral standards in politics have changed. And yet Congress has been reluctant and very hesitant to adopt any guidelines as to its conduct.
The National Educational Television Network presents a study in 9 parts on the issues and conflicts confronting the nation's lawmakers. The Changing Congress. Tonight, the ethics and the image. Your reporter, Joseph McCaffrey.
In 1787, Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to a friend, "The basis of our government being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that opinion right." So the first question this dialogue on congressional ethics poses is, has Congress kept that opinion right? Or to use the jargon of the 20th century, has Congress projected a good image? Senator Proxmire of Wisconsin feels that it has.
Well, I think that Congress has a good image as compared to the image it's had in the past. I think that most people have respect for Congress. I think it depends a great deal on the experience that people have had with their own congressmen, their own senators.
Dr. Royce Hanson, a political scientist from American University in Washington, disagrees.
Congress has a bad image. It has generally had a bad image with the American public, very often with the press. You see this reflected in our editorial cartoons, in our popular cartoons, and in very often our literature, especially our folk literature and popular literature. So that
Dr. Hanson believes the public all too often sees members of Congress as banal, pettifogging politicians like cartoonist Al Capp, Senator Fogbound. To prove his point, Dr. Hanson cites a poll that has been taken for the last 10 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It asks people how they feel about commercial television, about the local educational system, about Congress, and about their local legislature. And this poll is very interesting because combining all of the favorable responses, the Albuquerque public schools have generally come first. Commercial television has come second, and Congress has ranked third, well ahead of the state legislature, but still third and behind commercial television, which I think is a kind of an interesting commentary on the view that Americans have toward one of our major national public institutions.
Republican Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky is concerned about the public's opinion of Congress. He was a minority member of the committee that investigated the questionable conduct of the former Senate Majority Secretary Bobby Baker, the most recent scandal to tarnish the congressional image. Senator Cooper is very critical of the handling of that investigation.
I think there's no question that the investigation in the Baker case and other questions that have come up about members of the Congress and in connection with it have caused a great many people over the country to wonder if the Congress, members of the Congress, observe ethical standards. They question whether or not we have conflicts of interest. There's no question that this has cast a shadow over the Congress.
Senator Proxmire, a Democrat, while believing the image of Congress is not bad, is nevertheless critical of the way in which his Democratic colleagues conducted the Baker investigation.
I think the Bobby Baker investigation has not been handled as it should have been. There's no question that Bobby Baker had his power for only one reason, because he knew senators. As far as I know, only one senator was called to testify, and that was on a minor matter. No other senators were called to testify. I think that all those senators who had been involved in any way with Baker, any substantial way, should have been called to testify. Because without that, it meant that Baker was the fall guy, and the members of the Senate whose influence Baker was using were not brought into the situation at all, so the investigation really didn't mean anything.
The Senate apparently has locked the Bobby Baker skeleton in the closet, along with quite a few more. However, not all senators are willing to ignore it. Senator Cooper has concrete proposals for reform as a result of the Baker case.
I propose that a standing committee be created and approved by the Senate, called the Committee on Standards and Conduct, composed of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, who would have the authority to receive complaints of any misconduct or irregularities upon the part of members primarily, although it would reach employees too, and to take whatever action it thought is necessary, recommended to the Senate.
And what happened to the committee?
The Senate approved my resolution and authorized the establishment of the committee, but the members have never been appointed.
But the Bobby Baker case is just a symptom of a more serious illness that afflicts Congress. That illness, which is the very heart of the problem of congressional ethics, is conflict of interest, the conflict between public responsibility and private involvement. For example, at least 300 members of Congress are lawyers. Should these men retain an interest in law firms while they are in Congress? Congressman Richard Bowling feels they should not.
There are a great many members who come in as lawyers who give up their practice entirely. There are others who actually seem to supplement their legal income with their service in Congress. They spend more time practicing law, and I'm sure get much better paid for the practice of law than they do in their activities in Congress, which is disadvantageous in 2 ways. Number one, it's certainly an ethical problem, and number two, the people of their district and of the United States are deprived of their full-time services.
A Washington correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune, Dom Bonafide, who has written a series of articles on congressional ethics, cites 2 examples of lawyers who still continue to practice.
Congressman Abraham Moulter of New York has a very thriving law practice in New York City, as does Congressman Seller. Both of these congressmen have what they call dual partnership arrangements, in which they have 2 firms in one. The one firm in which they are associated and the other firm which their name is omitted, the latter firm handles government business. And this is one manner in which they, at least on the surface, are able to divorce themselves from appearing to engage in lawsuits practice in which the government is involved.
Other members of Congress maintain interests in corporations that do business with or are regulated by the federal government.
Congressman Pepper of Miami, who has introduced bills in support of savings and loan associations. He is a director and officer of 2 savings and loan associations, one in Miami Beach and one in Cape Kennedy.
Should members of Congress divest themselves of stocks in corporations that do business with the government to avoid possible conflicts of interest? Thomas Jefferson once wrote that where the private interest of a member is concerned in a bill or question, he is to withdraw. But that was back in 1801. How do our modern lawmakers feel? Congressman John Monaghan of Connecticut.
When a member does go into Congress, he takes the veil, and he has to take certain disabilities along with it, if that's what you want to call them. But I see no reason why he should divest himself of stock in a public corporation. General Motors does a lot of business with the Defense Department, but there'd be no reason why an individual congressman should not own stock in General Motors.
This is the opinion of most of our lawmakers. Yet, if it is ethically right, why does Congress require presidential appointees to divest themselves of their holdings? Congressman Richard Bowling of Missouri.
I think we have to come closer in the field of ethics to requiring of ourselves the same kind of thing that we require of the executive. For example, we made the Secretary of Defense, Mr. McNamara, virtually divest himself of a fortune in Ford Motor stock on the theory that if he didn't divest himself, he would have a conflict of interest. Now, this is not, in my judgment, true of a man of the quality of McNamara. I don't think his judgment would be affected by what stock he owned. But we require that of him, but we don't require the same thing of ourselves. And perhaps even more important, we do not require of ourselves the minimum that I think would be sound, and that is full disclosure of what our assets are.
If members of Congress won't divest themselves, should they at least report their financial interest? Congressman Bowling.
I think that it should be a matter of public record what a member of Congress and his immediate family hold in the way of a business interest, a legal interest, stocks and bonds.
Well, I believe that it constitutes an invasion of privacy. I believe that members of Congress are entitled to privacy just as much as corporation executives or anyone else. I think that there should not be a presumption that simply because you are in public office, you must reveal what in most cases I'm sure would not be at all spectacular and has not proved to be spectacular, but you must reveal what someone in other enterprises is not compelled to do.
This is an invasion of privacy, admittedly, but you have to balance off these different rights. And I think the right of the public to know what their public servants, what motivates their public servants, what might motivate their public servants, is critical.
While other charges may be more serious, nothing tarnishes the image of Congress more than politicians who put their wives and relatives on their congressional payrolls. Don Bonafide of the Herald Tribune comments.
Several years ago, it was brought out that more than 100 congressmen and senators had relatives on their staffs, many of them who never came to the office. This is still done, perhaps not so openly, but it is still done. Adam Clayton Powell, the congressman from Harlem, is married and has a wife in Puerto Rico who is still on his staff, makes, I believe, $14,000 a year. She never, or very seldom, comes to Washington. What she does, no one knows. Despite the adverse publicity, she is still on his staff.
We asked Chairman Powell about this. Mr. Chairman, you have been attacked in the press because you employ your wife who works in Puerto Rico.
She comes to Washington, New York. Yes.
What has been your defense of these attacks?
Well, my defense is back where we were before. I forget the name of the reporter of Scripps Howard Press that did the expose a couple of years ago, and he unearthed 139 close relatives on payrolls. We don't know the Senate because the Senate isn't honest. They hide their payrolls, and the public doesn't know. And so I believe until we pass a flat law abolishing all relatives, not only on your own staff, but other staffs and committees, that we should go along the way we're doing it.
Join Congress and see the world. That could be the motto of some members who plead for economy and welfare programs, then fly off on fact-finding missions to such locales as Rome and Paris at taxpayers' expense. At the time we interviewed Congressman Powell in June, the chairman, to whom the joys of junketing are not exactly unknown, broke a story about his colleagues.
Now, just this weekend, no one knows it, but 80 members of Congress in a chartered jet are going to Paris for the weekend.
Later that day, Bonafide confirmed it.
Today, right now, there are an estimated 80 congressmen in Paris attending the Paris Air Show. There is some need for this. There probably should be some people over there from the Congress, but it's doubtful whether they need 80 over there. They are flown over by Air Force planes and also by private airlines who are interested in getting these congressmen over there, because the more congressmen they get interested in this facet of the industry, the larger appropriations they're liable to to get for research and for subsidies.
Another conflict of interest arises when members become too close to the executive branch, which they are supposed to be overseeing and regulating. For example, many members hold military reserve commissions, and some sit on committees that review authorizing legislation and appropriations for the military. They become very involved, and some members serve almost as a built-in lobby for the armed forces. Jim Lucas of Scripps Howard newspapers wrote a series of articles on this subject before going off to report the war in Vietnam. We interviewed him shortly after he returned to Washington from the fighting. Perhaps, having seen action, he is more critical of some of those who have not.
It is quite common for all of the armed forces to grant commissions, reserve commissions to members of Congress. In many cases, these have gone to men who had no prior military service. There have been instances, and the Air Force has been the worst offender in this, in which men have been granted reserve commissions who had no possible credentials. I can cite the case of Congressman Batten of Montana, who came out of World War II, I think, a seaman second class, and then was elected to Congress 20 years later, at which point the Air Force discovered hitherto unsuspected qualities in this man who had been a seaman second class 20 years earlier, and made him a reserve major.
Lucas feels the practice of holding a reserve commission poses an ethical problem, that an active member of one of the forces becomes a special pleader for that force when its budget comes to Congress. He cites an example.
But I think the most flagrant example really involves Congressman Bob Sykes of Florida. Bob is, as I said, a major general in the Army Chemical Corps, the only second major general they ever had. Every year, I don't know if this is true now, but when I investigated this in '63, it was true. At budget time, he would put on his uniform, go over to the Pentagon, help draw up the Chemical Corps' budget, take off his uniform, come sit on the committee that passed on it. Everybody would defer to good old Bob. Bob, you know about this. Is it a good budget? Of course it's a good budget. It would go through like that. This was of obvious advantage to the Army Chemical Corps to have Bob Sykes as a major general.
A critical area in the conflict of interest question is campaign contributions. Will Rogers said politics has got so expensive that it takes lots of money to even get beat with. Nowadays, it's taking more and more money to get beat with or to win with. Senator Proxmire on the cost of campaigning.
The fact is that campaigning is immensely expensive now. The cost is going up in every election. It's going up very rapidly. The first time I ran for a statewide office in Wisconsin, I ran for governor, and the cost of the campaign was in the area of $50,000. Last time I ran, the cost was around $250,000.
What's the year span there?
1952 was the first time, 1964 was the last time.
So
in 12 years, it had increased fivefold.
Don Bonafide on the cost of Bobby Kennedy's campaign for the Senate seat for New York.
In New York State, when Bobby Kennedy ran in 1964, last year, it is estimated that he spent at least $2.5 to $3 million alone. I'm not certain of that figure, but it is in that area.
Politicians need more money to campaign because costs of communications media have increased. Even in small rural states, rising costs have made it more difficult for men of moderate means to campaign. Congressman Stanley Tupper from Maine underlines the problem.
For instance, I have campaigned in 5 major campaigns, primaries and general elections, during the last 5 years. This has meant that I've had to go to the same people, and most of my friends don't have any more money than I do, and this is difficult because you're going to the same sources over and over. It's really nothing more than genteel begging, and no proud man likes to do this over and over. It's the most serious handicap facing a person of moderate income today, and without this, representative government will fail. You can't have all rich men, and you can't have men that will make their income in some other way.
Then how does the politician get the money to run his campaign? Walter Pincus of Washington's Evening Star has written a number of articles dealing with campaign spending.
It's clear that campaigns now are financed more than ever before, despite the Goldwater campaign where you had thousands and almost millions of small contributors. The bulk of campaigns are financed by large contributors. And in the main, they are contributing because they hope to, at one time or another, use the facilities of the governmental official or the party or whatever it is they're giving to at a future date.
To give some idea of the importance of large contributors, in 1960, the two national parties reported receiving about $28 million, over half of which came in contributions of $1,000 or more. It is estimated that only 5% of the voters contribute any money to parties or candidates. Senator Newberger comments on the dangers inherent in this dependence on large contributors.
You must feel an obligation to somebody who's given you a big contribution. I don't see how you could be debonair about it. Now, some people just want entree to your office, or they want you to come and speak at a dinner or something like that. But there are others who are going to be knocking at your door pretty steadily. And how on earth are you going to give them a cold shoulder when you've accepted a good many $1,000s from them? I don't think you could.
The Federal Corrupt Practices Act, passed in 1925, attempts to control campaign spending by limiting contributions to $5,000, limiting total expenditures by candidates, and requiring candidates and national political committees to report all receipts and expenditures. In practice, the law is meaningless. It does not apply to primary elections. Reports are filed after the election, and limits on contributions are evaded by setting up endless separate committees, each of which may accept contributions of the legal amount. Furthermore, the law does not require these committees to report at all if they operate in only one state. As most of them do, they can accept contributions of any size. Dr. Henson.
The adequacy of the present disclosure law is just horrid. It really encourages, in the way that it is written and in the way that it is administered, the hiding of very important contributions.
In 1962, for example, congressional candidates reported spending more than $18 million. It is estimated, however, that the total was closer to $100 million. Proposals for new election laws have been made every year since 1956, but all have died in committee. Senator Proxmire feels the best solution is full disclosure.
The best we can provide, I think, is the searchlight of public scrutiny. In other words, require that reports be made not only with the name of the person contributing, but with his identification, his occupation. The amount contributed, it has to be reported, it seems to me, in time. There should be a cutoff date, no contributions after, say, 4 days before the election. 24 hours after the contribution is made, it should be reported and made available to the opponent so he can publicize it.
During our interviews, a number of members made suggestions for possible ethical reforms. Senator Clifford Case has introduced a bill which he hopes will eliminate conflicts of interest that members may have as a result of their business and financial interests.
My bill would require everyone in Congress, every employee of Congress and of congressmen, including, of course, senators, and every employee of the executive branch, candidates for congressional office, annually to disclose, to make a list and make it public. And this is important, make it public at once, of their assets and liabilities, their income and their financial interests. This would apply as far as employees of Congress and employees of the executive branch are concerned, to people getting over, I think, $15,000 a year.
Case admits, however, that past bills on ethics have died because of the inertia and apathy of Congress. Bonafide feels there will be no change and cites the power structure of Congress, and particularly men like the minority leader of the Senate, Everett Dirksen.
He himself is associated in a law firm in Peoria. He's the director of a savings and loan association in Chicago. He is one of the antagonists of ethics reforms. He maintains, as other senators do also, that any ethical guidelines, new legislation would be an invasion of the senators' private lives. He claims that he would be a second-class citizen if these reforms were levied against him and the other congressmen. And because senators as powerful as Senator Dirksen, because Southern conservatives, the power structure of the Congress, are opposed to any proposed legislation or House rules concerning ethics, there's little likelihood that anything will be done about this particular area of government.
Congressman Monaghan feels that new rules for ethical reforms would be meaningless. The most important thing is the individual member's attitude to the responsibility of public office.
I think in all this area, the most important factor is the conscience of the individual member of Congress. You can't legislate morality. You can make all the rules in the world. There are a million ways that any individual member could get compensation for doing a certain thing if he wanted to. The ingenuity of the human mind is without limit, and all these things could be, these obstacles could be surmounted, so that it is a question of what the individual himself thinks is proper and seemly and best comports with his responsibility to his constituents and to the United States.
This is true. You cannot legislate morality, nor can you expect politicians to be more moral than the people who elected them. It is also true that the public, by and large, is indifferent to what goes on in Washington. They have almost come to expect politics and politicians to be corrupt. But nevertheless, that is no reason why Congress should not lay down guidelines or a code of ethical behavior for itself, even though there are bound to be imperfections or loopholes in any written law. 4 months ago, Congress, for the first time in 20 years, set up a joint committee to analyze its conduct and its system of operation. It would be irresponsible folly if this investigation were to end up making a few sterile recommendations and avoiding the basic moral issues which should be covered by a code of ethics. It is 100 years since Congress last set down any rules governing its conduct. That's when the last conflict of interest statute was adopted. Times have changed. It's high time Congress changed.
This completes our current series on the changing Congress.